share a story, and I'll try to do it as quickly as possible. And I literally needed Aisha to hold me up at one point. And then I had to go home because I couldn't take it. I had a gentleman come in to my cubby, and he needed some bus passes, and he needed some other things. And as I sat down and I started to fill out my paperwork, and I asked him the little questions I need to ask him, he had such a different name. And I said, oh, and I said his name. And I said, that's so different. I says, where do you come from? And he told me, he says, I come from Africa. And I says, oh, that's so different. I says, whereabouts in Africa? And he says, I come from Sierra Leone. And I had just watched a movie called Black Diamond. And I said, I've heard about that place. And he says, yeah. And he put his head down. And I said, well, what did you do when you were in Sierra Leone? And that's when he put his head down. And he says, you really want to know what I did? And I says, yeah. And I'm thinking, he worked at a car wash and, sold something at a store. And he says, for 3 years, he says, after the guerrillas came in and slaughtered my family in front of me, he said, they took me prisoner. And I ended up having to throw babies in the river and cut people's heads off. And he put his head down, and tears came. And I said, I was taken back. And I held his hand. And I said, I am so glad you're here. And he says, I've never told anybody. He says, but I think I need to say something to somebody because he says, I have nightmares at night. And I said, you don't have to do that anymore. I said, you are completely forgiven for that. That is not something you do on your own. And I asked him if I could pray with him. And he said, yes. And I said a little prayer. And then I had to leave the room because I knew I was going to lose it if I didn't get out in front of him. And I went into one and I got the things I needed. And by the time I got back there, he was drawing on a piece of paper that he found in his little cubby. And he drew the map of Africa. And he drew the spot, put a star on where Sierra Leone was. And he said, this is where I lost my life. But he says, here is where I got it. And I thanked him again. He says, I want you to see something before you go. And I said, what? And he got up and he said, I want you to see my back. I said, okay. And he turned around and he lifted up his back, his shirt. I've never seen scars like that. But he says, you've healed my scars today. And I put that down and we had a hug. We had a moment. I have a moment for this gentleman. And I promised him, I said, I'm going to pray for you every day until we meet again.